The young woman had been working at the restaurant for a few months now. Every day she walked in through the back door with the same routine, a quick greeting to the other staff, putting on her apron, and getting ready to serve the evening's guests. The restaurant was nice, classy, with white linen cloths on the tables and silver chandeliers hanging overhead. It was the kind of place where people came to celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, and special occasions. Everything about it was elegant except for her role. She wasn't the chef, the manager, or anyone with a real title. She was just a waitress. The ones who took orders, delivered drinks, and kept the guests satisfied. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and that's what mattered. She had always dreamed of doing something else, though. Something bigger, something that made her heart race with excitement. But dreams, as she had learned, were often out of reach. She had always been drawn to music. More specifically, the piano. It had been her passion since she was a little girl. She could still remember the first time she heard a piano piece that took her breath away. The sound of the keys, the way the music flowed and filled the room, it made her feel something deep inside. She wanted to be the one playing that piano, to create something that could make others feel the way she did when she listened. But as she got older, life got in the way. Her family wasn't wealthy, and paying for piano lessons was out of the question. She had no choice but to let that dream slip away, buried under the weight of responsibilities and the reality of adulthood. Still, the piano always remained a part of her, like an old friend she could never quite forget. Every now and then, she would catch herself humming a tune or tapping her fingers on the counter when she was cleaning dishes. It was her way of escaping, even if just for a moment. The other waitstaff at the restaurant didn't know about her love for music. They didn't know that whenever she looked at the piano in the corner of the dining room, her heart skipped a beat. They just saw her as another waitress, another person working the shift to make ends meet. Some of them didn't even care to know her beyond that. There was one waitress in particular who liked to joke around with her. She would often say things like, "Don't you think you'd be better off dreaming of becoming a professional waiter instead of a pianist?" The others would laugh, and she would laugh along with them. It wasn't that the teasing bothered her, she was used to it. But deep down it stung. It reminded her of everything she couldn't have, of the life she'd never live. But she pushed those feelings away and focused on what she could control, doing her job well. She worked long hours, always with a smile on her face, greeting guests and making them feel at home. At the end of the night, when the guests had left and the restaurant was quiet, she would wash the dishes and stack the chairs, her thoughts drifting to the piano in the corner. The soft glow of the chandelier light made it look almost magical. She sometimes wondered what it would feel like to sit down and play, to let her fingers glide over the keys as the music filled the empty room. But it was just a dream, nothing more than that. She had learned to be realistic. Her life was here at the restaurant, serving food and drinks to people who didn't know her. No one cared about her hidden passion or the music that lived inside her. And that was fine. She had a job to do. One evening, as she was serving a table near the piano, she overheard a conversation between two customers sitting at a table nearby. They were discussing the restaurant's upcoming events, and one of them asked, "Does the restaurant ever have any live music? A pianist or something?" The second guest responded, "I think they have a piano over there in the corner, but I've never seen anyone play it." The first guest chuckled. What a waste. A beautiful piano just sitting there collecting dust. Someone should be playing it. The conversation stuck with her as she went about her duties, refilling glasses and delivering orders. The piano, yes, the beautiful unused piano. It seemed like such a shame to let it sit there untouched. And yet she understood. Who would want someone like her, a waitress, to play it? It wasn't even something worth asking. After all, she wasn't a professional pianist. She wasn't even a musician anymore. She was just someone who liked to dream. As the evening wore on, she couldn't help but glance over at the piano again. There it was, just sitting there, waiting for someone to bring it to life. She often imagined what it would be like to play a song on it. Her fingers moved involuntarily, as if they were already reaching for the keys. She quickly snapped herself out of the daydream. It wasn't the time or place for that. At the end of the shift, she was cleaning up the tables when the restaurant owner, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, came up to her. "Hey," the owner said with a smile. "How are you today?" "I'm good," she replied, trying to hide the exhaustion in her voice. "You know," the owner continued, "I've been thinking. We have that piano in the corner and we've never really done anything with it. What do you think?" The waitress blinked, surprised by the sudden question. What do you mean? Well, I was thinking it might be nice to have some live music here, maybe even at the next big event. Do you know anyone who plays? She hesitated for a moment, then quickly shook her head. No, not really, but I'm sure you could find someone. The owner looked at her for a moment as if considering something. You know, you've been here for a while and I've noticed you're good with people. How would you feel about playing? If you've ever had any experience with music, I'd like to know. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to answer. She hadn't played for years, not in front of anyone, and certainly not in a place like this. Actually, I do know how to play, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. But I haven't really performed in a while. The owner smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. I understand. Just think about it. You never know, it could be a great opportunity. With that, she walked away, leaving the waitress standing there, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't sure if the owner was serious or just making a casual comment. But the idea of playing, of showing the world what she could do, just for a moment, felt like a spark of hope. It was a dream she thought she had buried, but suddenly it felt alive again, pulsing in her chest. The days that followed the conversation with the restaurant owner felt strange. The idea of playing the piano in front of people, especially in a place like this, seemed too good to be true. She couldn't stop thinking about it, but every time she did, doubts crept in. She hadn't played in years, and the thought of performing in front of a room full of people terrified her. What if she messed up? What if people laughed at her? Her mind was a whirlwind of uncertainty, and she found herself unable to shake the nagging feeling that it was all a dream, something too far out of reach. But life went on, as it always did. The usual routine continued. She arrived at the restaurant, put on her apron, and got to work. The restaurant was bustling with customers that evening, a mix of regulars and first-time guests. She moved through the space, carrying trays of food, refilling glasses, and offering a warm smile to everyone she passed. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but inside her thoughts were preoccupied with the piano. She had always loved the idea of music bringing people together, of creating a connection with an audience through the sound of the keys. It was something she had dreamed about doing since she was young, but life hadn't worked out that way. She had chosen practicality over passion, reality over dreams. Now it seemed like the opportunity to do what she loved was right in front of her, but the fear of failure loomed large. Later that evening, the restaurant grew quieter as the dinner rush slowed. The guests had finished their meals and the staff began to clean up the tables. The atmosphere shifted from the hustle and bustle of the evening to a calmer, more relaxed energy. It was during this time that the owner found her again, her presence no longer a surprise. She walked up to the young woman, a thoughtful expression on her face. So, the owner began, have you thought more about the piano? The young woman froze for a moment, her stomach tightening. She had been hoping the topic wouldn't come up again, but here it was. I've been thinking about it, she said, her voice hesitant. But I'm not sure if I'm ready. It's been a long time since I played in front of anyone. I don't even know if I could do it. The owner raised an eyebrow, but her tone remained gentle. I understand. But here's the thing, if you don't try, you'll never know. The piano's just sitting there, waiting for someone to give it life. Why not you? The young woman felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure if it was nerves or something deeper. I don't know. What if people don't like it? What if I mess up? The owner smiled, a reassuring smile. That's the thing about music. It's not about being perfect. It's about sharing something real, something from the heart. If you play with that kind of passion, people will feel it. There was something in the owner's words that stuck with her. The idea of playing not to impress but to express felt different than the pressure she had put on herself before. Maybe it wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about something deeper, something more human. The owner patted her gently on the shoulder. Think about it. No pressure, but I think you've got something special. The young woman didn't know how to respond. All she could do was nod. She felt a flicker of something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But it was fragile, like a tiny spark in the darkness, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to let it grow. The next few days were filled with internal debate. She tried to push the thought of playing the piano out of her mind, focusing on her work. But every time she walked past the piano in the corner, she couldn't help but glance at it. The sight of it seemed to pull at her in a way she couldn't explain. It was like the piano was calling to her, reminding her of everything she had buried. One evening, after a particularly long shift, she found herself standing alone in the quiet restaurant. The other staff had left and the lights were dimmed. The sound of her footsteps echoed as she walked across the floor, moving toward the piano. She had done this many times before, walking past it, barely acknowledging its presence, but tonight was different. Tonight, the idea of playing didn't seem as impossible. Her hand reached out almost without thinking and rested on the edge of the piano. The keys were cold to the touch, but it felt right. She took a deep breath, letting the silence of the room wash over her. For a moment, she just stood there, her fingers hovering over the keys. It was as if the world outside had faded away, leaving only the soft glow of the chandelier and the quiet hum of her own heartbeat. She hesitated. She had no sheet music, no plan. It was just her, the piano, and the silence. But something inside her urged her to play. Maybe it was the owner's words, or maybe it was the simple truth that this was her moment, the chance to take the first step. She sat down slowly, her fingers grazing the keys, and then, without any more hesitation, she began to play. The sound that filled the room was simple, but it was enough. It was raw and real, just like the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. She let her fingers guide her, the music flowing as she played what she remembered from years ago, the pieces she used to practice in the quiet of her room. Her heart raced as she played, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something else, something freeing. As she played, she closed her eyes, losing herself in the music. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. She felt connected to something bigger than herself. The sound of the piano filled the space around her, and she let the music tell the story she had been too afraid to speak aloud. She wasn't sure how long she played, but by the time she stopped, she was out of breath. Her hands were trembling slightly, but there was a sense of calm that washed over her. She had done it. She had played, and for the first time, she didn't feel embarrassed or self-conscious. She had simply played because it was what she loved. As she sat there, her fingers still resting on the keys, she realized something important. It wasn't about the applause or the approval of others. It was about doing something for herself, something that made her feel whole. She didn't know if she would ever play for an audience or if the restaurant owner would ever give her the opportunity. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she had found a piece of herself again. The soft hum of the piano still echoed in the empty room as she stood up and slowly walked away. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She felt like there was more to her story than what she had been telling herself all these years. The next few days passed in a blur. The young woman found it hard to focus at work. Every time she entered the restaurant, her eyes would drift toward the piano. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was calling her, urging her to come back to play again, but fear had a way of creeping back into her thoughts. What if the owner was serious? What if she was asked to perform in front of an audience? The idea of playing in front of others still felt impossible, even though she had taken that small step by playing alone in the quiet of the restaurant. It was late one afternoon when the owner approached her again. The young woman had just finished setting the tables and was wiping down the countertops when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned around to see the owner standing there, her expression thoughtful. "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about something," the owner said, her voice warm but firm. The young woman's heart skipped a beat. "About the piano?" The owner nodded, a small smile on her face. "Yes, actually. We've got an event coming up this weekend. It's a private dinner for a group of regulars, and we thought it might be nice to have some live music to go along with it. I was wondering if you'd be interested in playing." The young woman froze. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. She hadn't expected it to happen so soon. She thought maybe she would have more time to think, to prepare herself for something like this. But now here it was right in front of her. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I'm not sure. I haven't played in years. I don't think I'm ready for something like that." The owner studied her for a moment, her gaze steady but kind. "I understand if you're nervous, but you have a real gift. I saw it when you played last time. People would love to hear you." The young woman's mind raced. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to take the leap and finally share her music with others, but the fear was overwhelming. What if she messed up? What if the guests didn't like her playing? What if they laughed? I don't know," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, what if I'm not good enough? What if I make a mistake?" The owner smiled gently, her eyes softening. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to play from your heart. That's what matters. The young woman looked down at the floor, her thoughts swirling. She could hear the piano in her mind, the melodies she had played so many times in private. Could she really do it? Could she really step out of the shadows and play for an audience? Please, the owner added, her tone sincere. Think about it. You don't have to decide right now, but I think it could be a great opportunity for you. The young woman nodded slowly, still unsure of what to do. Okay, I'll think about it. The owner smiled and gave her a pat on the back. Good, take your time. Just know that the piano's always there when you're ready. The conversation left her feeling unsettled. She went home that night with a knot in her stomach, her mind racing. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over again. She wanted to say yes, but the fear was suffocating. The thought of making a mistake, of being judged. It was enough to make her want to back out completely. But something inside her kept urging her to push through it, to take the leap. She thought back to the moment she had played alone in the restaurant, when she had felt the music fill the space and the weight of her fears had lifted, even if only for a moment. That had been a small victory, but it was enough to remind her that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. The next day, as the restaurant began to fill with customers, she found herself thinking more and more about the piano. It was just sitting there in the corner waiting. She had always known it was there, but now it felt different. It felt like an invitation, a challenge, a chance to prove something, not to anyone else, but to herself. As the evening approached, the restaurant owner came to find her again. This time her expression was more serious, as if she were preparing for something important. Hey, the owner said. The event's this weekend, and we're finalizing details. Have you made a decision? The young woman's stomach fluttered, and she could feel the familiar knot tightening in her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she felt completely unprepared. I don't know, she admitted. I'm just so nervous. I don't think I can do it. What if I mess up? The owner paused, looking at her with understanding. I've been there. I know what it's like to be scared. But if you don't try, you'll never know what you're capable of. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing something real. If you play from your heart, people will feel it. You don't have to be flawless, you just have to be yourself. The young woman looked at the owner, her words sinking in. She had heard those same words from herself before, but hearing them from someone else made them feel more real. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. Maybe she just had to take that first step, no matter how small it seemed. I'll do it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll play. The owner's face lit up with a smile. You won't regret it, I promise. Over the next few days, the young woman found herself practicing more than ever. She spent hours sitting at the piano, playing the same songs over and over again until her fingers were sore. The music was both comforting and terrifying. Each note seemed to echo her doubts, but at the same time, it reminded her of why she loved playing in the first place. She played for herself, for the joy it brought her, and for the chance to share that joy with others. The night of the event arrived, and the restaurant was buzzing with excitement. The private dinner was a big deal, and the guests were some of the restaurant's most loyal patrons. As she walked through the door that evening, her nerves were on edge. She could hear the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft laughter of the guests. And in the corner, the piano stood waiting. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. This was it. There was no turning back now. She had made the decision, and now she had to follow through. She had to play. When the owner approached her to let her know it was time, her heart seemed to stop. This was it. The moment she had been avoiding. The moment that would change everything. But as she walked to the piano, a strange sense of calm washed over her. The music, the piano, it had always been a part of her, and tonight it was time to let it be a part of everyone else. She sat down at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. The room had quieted, and all eyes were on her. She could feel the weight of their gazes, but instead of shrinking away, she lifted her head. She took one last deep breath, and then, with trembling fingers, she began to play. The room fell silent as she touched the keys. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. No chatter, no clinking of glasses, just the soft echo of her breath in the stillness. She had expected to feel fear, but surprisingly, there was something else. An odd sense of calm that seemed to wrap itself around her like a warm blanket. Her fingers gently brushed over the piano, finding their place on the familiar keys. The soft, almost tentative notes began to fill the air. It wasn't a grand or complex piece, just a simple melody she had learned years ago, one that had always made her feel at home. The music swirled around her, quiet and intimate at first, just a few notes that seemed to float through the air, unsure of where to go. The guests, who had been laughing and talking just moments before, stopped and turned their attention to the piano. She could feel their eyes on her, but for some reason it didn't make her anxious. It was as though, in that moment, the room belonged only to the music and her. She closed her eyes for a split second, letting the melody guide her. The sound of the piano grew more confident as she continued to play. Her hands moved with increasing assurance, and the soft notes turned into something more powerful, more alive. She could feel the music filling the room, reaching out to the guests, inviting them in. Each note seemed to tell a story, a piece of her story, of dreams, of struggles, of moments where she almost gave up. As she played, she could hear the gasps of surprise from the guests. There was no applause, no overt signs of approval, but there was a quiet reverence in the air. It was as if they were all holding their breath, just waiting for her to finish. She had always been afraid of what others might think, but now, as she played, she realized that the music wasn't for them. It was for her. It was her truth, her voice, her chance to be heard. The restaurant, which had once felt like a place where she simply worked, had transformed into something more. The piano, which had once seemed like an unreachable dream, now felt like a companion, something that was part of her, something that was meant to be shared. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was just a waitress. She felt like she was something more, someone with a story to tell, someone with a voice. The music carried on, each note flowing into the next. She didn't think about the future, didn't think about the guests or the restaurant or anything else. She only thought about the music, about the way it made her feel. It was like an old friend she hadn't seen in years, but as soon as they reconnected, everything clicked back into place. When she finished the first piece, she sat still for a moment, not sure what to do next. The room was quiet, and for a brief moment she thought she had messed up. She had no reason to believe it, but the silence felt heavy, almost unbearable. But then slowly a soft round of applause began. It started with one person, a gentle clap, and then another joined in. Before long, the entire room was clapping, some standing in appreciation. Her heart raced. She hadn't expected that. The applause wasn't loud or thunderous, but it was genuine. It wasn't just polite applause, it was real, as if the guests were acknowledging something deeper, something beyond the performance. She smiled to herself, surprised by the warmth of it, but she didn't stop there. She moved into another piece, something a little more complicated. This time, she let her fingers dance across the keys faster and more confidently. With every note, she felt the music pulling her in deeper, urging her to let go of any lingering fears. She let her body sway with the rhythm, losing herself in the sound, letting the music become a part of her. The guests, who had been quiet and reserved before, were now clearly moved. Some of them whispered to each other, their voices filled with surprise and admiration. She couldn't hear their words, but she could hear the excitement in their tone. It wasn't just her playing they were reacting to. It was the raw emotion, the vulnerability she had poured into each note. She wasn't just playing for them. She was playing for herself too. Her mind began to drift as the piece continued. She had played this song countless times, but tonight it felt different. It felt like she was playing it for the first time, like the music was revealing something new to her, something she had never fully understood before. It wasn't just a song. It was a story, a conversation between her and the piano. When she finished, the applause was louder this time. It wasn't thunderous, but it was heartfelt. She felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't mind. She had done something she hadn't thought possible. She had shared a piece of herself with others, and they had received it in a way that made her feel seen, understood, and respected. The night continued, and she played a few more pieces, each one flowing more naturally than the last. She was no longer thinking about the guests or the piano, or the possibility of making a mistake. She was simply playing, letting the music guide her wherever it wanted to go. The fear she had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a sense of freedom and release. This was what it felt like to truly live. As the last note of the final piece rang out, the room erupted into applause once more. She looked up, her heart beating in her chest. The guests were standing now, their claps more vigorous, their expressions full of appreciation. The young woman took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the overwhelming feeling of gratitude and pride made her dizzy. She had done it. She had played in front of a room full of people, and not only had she survived, but she had also been received in a way she never expected. The owner walked over to her, her face beaming with pride. "That was incredible," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "You're a natural. I knew you had it in you." The young woman smiled, feeling the weight of her nerves slowly dissipate. "I didn't expect them to react like that," she said, her voice still a little shaky. "I thought I might mess up." The owner shook her head. "You didn't mess up. You gave them something real, something they didn't expect. That's the beauty of music. It's not about being perfect. It's about sharing something from the heart." The young woman looked around the room, her eyes landing on the guests who were still clapping and congratulating her. She had always been afraid that they wouldn't understand her, that they wouldn't accept her for who she really was. But tonight that fear had faded away. The applause, the smiles, the admiration. It wasn't about her performance. It was about her courage to step up, to share something deeply personal with people she had never met before. As the night wound down and the guests began to leave, she found herself standing by the piano, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. She had taken the leap and it had paid off. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time she didn't feel afraid. She felt free. The piano, once an unattainable dream, now felt like an old friend, a friend who had always been there, waiting for her to come back, to take her place behind the keys. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she knew one thing for sure: she was ready to play. The following days felt surreal. She had expected a rush of excitement after her performance, but what she didn't anticipate was the quiet peace that had settled over her. Every time she walked into the restaurant, she felt different. It wasn't just the fact that she had played for an audience, but something deeper inside her had shifted. She had shared a part of herself that she thought was lost, and in return she had found something unexpected: confidence, maybe even pride. The guests who had been there that night didn't forget her performance. Word spread quickly about the waitress who could play the piano like a professional. Some guests even returned to the restaurant, not for the food or the atmosphere, but because they wanted to see her play again. They asked the owner if she would perform more often, if they could hear her play just one more time. But the young woman didn't know what to think. She hadn't expected to be remembered for something like this. She had always thought of herself as invisible at work, just another face in the crowd of waitstaff. But now it felt like her role had changed somehow. It wasn't just the piano that had captured their attention. It was her, the woman behind the piano. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was being seen for who she really was, not just as a waitress, but as someone with a talent that was worthy of recognition. The owner had been nothing but supportive. She checked in on her often, asking if she wanted to play again, if she had been practicing. At first, the young woman felt reluctant. The thought of performing again still made her nervous. But slowly, over time, she began to feel more comfortable with the idea. She practiced more often, not just at the restaurant, but at home too. The songs that once felt like distant dreams now felt like part of her routine. She wasn't performing for anyone else anymore. She was playing because it made her feel alive, because the music was a part of her that she had ignored for too long. As the days passed, more opportunities came. The owner began to schedule her for special events, private parties where guests specifically requested her to play. She was still nervous, but she had begun to realize that each performance was a little less scary than the last. The first time she played, it had felt like stepping into the unknown, but now, it felt like she was finally embracing something she had kept hidden for far too long. One evening, after a particularly successful performance, the owner asked her to join her for a cup of coffee in the small staff room at the back of the restaurant. It was late and the restaurant was mostly empty, save for a few lingering guests finishing their meals. "I think it's time we talked about something," the owner said, her voice serious yet kind. The young woman looked at her, a little confused. "What do you mean?" The owner leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. "You've got a real gift. People are starting to notice. You could take this further if that's what you want." You've got the talent and you've got the heart. The only thing holding you back is you. The words hit her like a wave. She had heard compliments before, but this was different. This wasn't just someone telling her she was good at her job. This was someone who believed in her, someone who saw more than just a waitress in a restaurant. I don't know, she said, looking down at her hands. I never thought about it like that. I've always just been me. I don't know if I'm ready for all that. The owner smiled, leaning back in her chair. You don't have to make any decisions now, but I want you to think about it. You have the potential to do something amazing, something bigger than this. It's just up to you to take the leap. The young woman sat back in her chair, the weight of the words settling in her chest. She had spent so many years hiding her passion, so many years telling herself that it wasn't possible, but now someone was telling her she could make it happen. She could have a future doing what she loved. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of pursuing music, of actually making a living doing what she loved, seemed like a fantasy. She had always dreamed of it, of course, but dreams often stayed locked away, safely tucked into a corner of the heart where they couldn't hurt. Now, though, it was different. She had proven to herself that she could stand in front of people, that she could share her talent. What was stopping her from taking the next step? The next few days were filled with reflection. She practiced more than ever. But this time, her practice wasn't just about getting better. It was about figuring out who she was and what she wanted. The idea of leaving her job as a waitress felt daunting, but at the same time, it felt like it might be the only way to fully embrace her passion. The restaurant owner didn't bring up the subject again, but the young woman could tell that she was waiting for her to make a choice. It was clear that the owner believed in her, but the decision was hers. She couldn't rely on anyone else to make it for her. One evening, as she finished her shift and was getting ready to leave, the owner came up to her. I've been thinking, she said, her voice casual. If you ever decide you want to take the leap, I'd be happy to help. We could talk to some people, see about getting you some gigs. You could even come back here and play if you want. But the choice is yours. The young woman looked up at her, the weight of her words sinking in. I'll think about it, she said, her voice steady but uncertain. The next day she woke up with a new clarity. She had spent so long doubting herself, so long telling herself that dreams were for other people. But maybe she had been wrong. Maybe dreams weren't just for people who were lucky enough to be born with the right circumstances. Maybe they were for anyone who was willing to take a chance. She spent the day making calls, researching music opportunities in the area. It was a big step, bigger than anything she had ever done before. But this time she wasn't afraid. She had already taken the first step by playing in front of an audience. Now it was time to take the next. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, her confidence grew. She began playing at local cafes, small events, and even recording her music. People started to recognize her, not just as the waitress who could play the piano, but as an artist, someone who had a future in music. She didn't need to wait for permission anymore. She had the talent, the passion, and the drive, and slowly, she began to see a future that was filled with music, not serving drinks. Her decision to step out of her comfort zone wasn't easy, but it was the best decision she had ever made. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she was excited about it. She had learned that dreams weren't meant to be kept hidden in the dark corners of the heart. They were meant to be shared, to be pursued no matter how terrifying or impossible they seemed. She had taken the leap, and now she was ready to fly. It wasn't long before she realized that the path she had chosen wasn't an easy one. The early days were filled with excitement, new opportunities, new venues, and the thrill of performing in front of strangers who were eager to hear her play. But as time went on, she started to feel the weight of the decision she had made. The excitement faded into exhaustion, and the fear of failure crept back in. She had left her job at the restaurant and begun to pursue music full-time. At first, it felt like a dream. She was doing what she loved, what she had always wanted to do. But soon the reality of being a full-time musician set in. There were moments when she questioned whether she had made the right choice. The first few performances she booked were small gigs at local cafes, intimate settings where people came to enjoy their meals, not necessarily to hear music. She played for hours, her fingers moving across the keys, pouring everything she had into each note. She enjoyed the music, of course, but there were times when she wondered if it was enough. The audiences were kind, polite even, but they weren't always engaged. It felt as though the music was just background noise, something to fill the silence while people ate their food or chatted with friends. At night, when she sat in her small apartment, her mind would race. Had she made the right decision? She missed the certainty of her old job, the regular hours, the steady paycheck. But now she was on her own, and every performance felt like a gamble. Would people show up? Would they like her music? Would she make enough money to pay the bills? The doubts were relentless. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, her mind spinning with worries about the future. She had left behind a stable job to chase a dream, and sometimes the weight of that decision felt unbearable. But then, there were the moments that reminded her why she had done it in the first place. The first time a stranger approached her after a performance and said, "You're really talented. I've never heard anything like that before." The feeling of being seen, truly seen for the first time in her life, or the nights when she played, and the music filled the room in a way that made everything else disappear. Those moments were rare, but they were enough to keep her going. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads. There were so many questions that remained unanswered. Where was her career going? Was she good enough to make it as a professional musician, or was she just another dreamer chasing an impossible fantasy? One evening, after a particularly long and tiring gig, she sat in her car parked outside the venue. The exhaustion from the performance weighed heavily on her body, but it was the doubt in her heart that kept her awake. She had played well that night, but the crowd hadn't been as responsive as she had hoped. She had done her best, but her best didn't seem to be enough. She couldn't help but wonder if she was fooling herself, if this was all just a pipe dream. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from the owner of the restaurant where she had once worked. "I heard you played tonight," the message said. "How did it go?" She stared at the screen for a moment before typing a quick reply. "It was fine. Nothing special." She set her phone down, her thoughts swirling again. She wasn't sure why she had said that. The performance hadn't been terrible, but it hadn't been the breakthrough she had hoped for either. The phone buzzed again. "Don't be too hard on yourself," the owner wrote. "The first few gigs are always tough. It's all part of the journey." The young woman let out a deep sigh. The words were kind, but they didn't feel like enough. The journey was harder than she had ever imagined. The road she had chosen was filled with uncertainty, and she wasn't sure if she had the strength to keep going. The next day, she woke up early, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. Her mind was still stuck in the spiral of self-doubt, but she forced herself to get out of bed. She had a new gig scheduled for the evening, a small concert at a local art gallery. She had agreed to perform in front of an audience of art enthusiasts, and while she was grateful for the opportunity, the thought of performing again filled her with anxiety. As the day wore on, she tried to distract herself with practice, but the music didn't come easily. Her fingers stumbled over the keys, and the melodies she once played with ease now felt foreign. She tried to shake it off, but the more she practiced, the more she felt like she was losing her touch. When she arrived at the gallery later that evening, she was still feeling uneasy. She set up her equipment, took a deep breath, and waited for the event to begin. The room was filled with people, but their faces seemed distant. She tried to calm her nerves, but the anxiety was suffocating. What if tonight was a repeat of the last performance, an indifferent crowd, polite applause, and nothing more? As the first notes of her music filled the room, she felt a wave of tension wash over her. She tried to focus on the piano, on the music, but the doubt in her mind kept pulling her away. Her fingers were stiff, and the melody she had worked so hard on felt wrong. The audience was quiet, but their lack of reaction only seemed to heighten her nerves. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the guests, a woman who had been sitting near the front, stood up and walked toward her. She didn't know what to expect, but the woman simply smiled and gave her a thumbs up. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. The young woman felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that she was seen, that her music mattered. The rest of the performance passed in a blur. She played with more confidence after that brief interaction, finding her rhythm again. The audience still wasn't as responsive as she had hoped, but it didn't matter as much anymore. She realized that it wasn't about the applause. It was about the music. It was about her being true to herself and sharing her passion with the world. When the performance was over, she packed up her things and left the gallery, the weight of her doubts still heavy in her chest. But as she walked down the street, she noticed something different. She wasn't as disappointed as she had been before. The performance hadn't been perfect, but she had gotten through it. She had faced her fear and played, despite the anxiety that had threatened to overwhelm her. And that, she realized, was a victory. The next morning, she received a message from the gallery curator, who thanked her for her performance. "You have a rare gift," the message read. "I hope we can work together again in the future." For the first time in weeks, the young woman felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the perfect performance, but it had been enough. She wasn't ready to give up yet. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let fear stop her from pursuing her dream. The weeks that followed were filled with both excitement and challenges. She had begun to build a small reputation in the local music scene, but the path was far from easy. Each day brought new opportunities, but also new doubts. She often found herself questioning if she was good enough, if her music could ever reach beyond small gatherings and local cafes. Yet, every time she sat at the piano, every time her fingers brushed the keys and melodies began to flow, a sense of purpose returned. She remembered the quiet night in the restaurant, the first time she had played in front of someone, and she realized that feeling, that connection, was why she kept going. Her life had changed in ways she hadn't expected. The routine of her old job was gone. She no longer woke up thinking about balancing trays and refilling drinks. Instead, she woke up thinking about her next performance, her next song, or even her next practice session. The shift wasn't easy. Money was tight, and the uncertainty of income sometimes kept her awake at night. There were nights when she wondered if she had made a mistake, if pursuing her passion had been selfish or foolish. But then she remembered the faces in the restaurant that night, the awe in the eyes of strangers who had listened and felt something real. That memory reminded her why she had taken the leap in the first place. One particular evening stood out. She had been invited to perform at a larger event, a local charity gala. It wasn't just a small crowd this time. There were people from all over the city, people who had come because of her growing reputation. She felt the nerves tightening in her chest as she stepped into the grand hall. The chandeliers hung high above, their lights reflecting off polished surfaces, and the chatter of guests filled the room. She paused for a moment, taking it all in. This was bigger than anything she had done before. She approached the piano, her hands shaking slightly. It wasn't the first time she had felt nervous before performing, but tonight the anxiety was stronger. She could feel the eyes of dozens of people on her, waiting for her to begin. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she remembered something the restaurant owner had told her. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing something real. That thought anchored her, and she began to play. The first notes were tentative, soft, almost unsure, but as she continued, her confidence grew. She let the music carry her, each melody a reflection of the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. Her fingers moved across the keys with a fluidity that surprised even her. It was as though the piano had become an extension of herself, a voice through which she could tell her story without words. The audience was silent, mesmerized. She noticed some leaning forward in their chairs, others closing their eyes to absorb the music. It wasn't just entertainment, it was connection. Every note she played seemed to touch someone, evoking memories, emotions, and feelings she could not see but could feel through their reactions. She realized that this was the power of music. It was universal, transcending differences and speaking directly to the heart. As the final note faded into the room, there was a moment of silence, a collective intake of breath. Then applause erupted. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, enthusiastic, and heartfelt. People were on their feet cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The young woman felt a rush of emotion she had never experienced before. Her heart raced and she felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to reach people through her music. After the performance, people approached her, praising her, asking questions about her songs, and even requesting private lessons. The experience was overwhelming, but it was also affirming. She had doubted herself countless times, worried about failure and feared judgment, but tonight proved that her talent and dedication had value. She had taken her first real step into a world that once seemed unreachable. In the days that followed, her life became a whirlwind of performances, interviews, and networking opportunities. She began recording her own music, experimenting with original compositions, and collaborating with other musicians. Every day was a new challenge, a new adventure, and although it was exhausting, it was also exhilarating. She had discovered that pursuing a passion required more than just talent. It required resilience, patience, and the courage to keep going even when fear and doubt threatened to hold her back. Despite the growing success, she remained grounded. She never forgot the restaurant where it all began, the quiet evenings spent practicing in the corner, and the supportive words of the owner who had believed in her when she doubted herself. That humility kept her focused, reminding her that success wasn't just about recognition or applause. It was about staying true to herself and the music she loved. There were still tough days. Not every performance went smoothly. Some audiences were indifferent and some opportunities fell through. She sometimes questioned if she was cut out for this life. But she learned to take each experience as part of the journey, to grow from challenges rather than be defeated by them. Every mistake became a lesson, every doubt a chance to strengthen her resolve. Slowly, she began to see that the path she had chosen wasn't about instant success. It was about persistence, passion, and the willingness to face fears head-on. One evening, after a particularly successful show at a local theater, she sat backstage alone, reflecting on how far she had come. The dim lights cast long shadows across the empty seats, and the echoes of applause still lingered in her ears. She thought about the girl who had once been too afraid to play in front of anyone, who had hid her talent behind the walls of self-doubt. That girl seemed like a lifetime ago. Now she was someone who had embraced her gift, who had taken risks, and who had discovered the strength within herself to follow her dreams. The realization filled her with a deep sense of gratitude. She had found a way to transform fear into courage, doubt into action, and a simple dream into reality. She knew the journey was far from over, that there would always be obstacles and uncertainties ahead, but she also knew that she had the power to face them, one note at a time. The young woman smiled, her fingers brushing the piano keys absent-mindedly as she sat alone backstage. She had learned something vital. Life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment or fearing judgment. It was about stepping into the unknown, trusting yourself and sharing your passion with the world. And as she looked forward to the future, she felt a sense of possibility unlike anything she had ever known. In the months that followed, her reputation grew even more. She began to receive invitations to perform at larger events, festivals, and even collaborations with other artists. Each opportunity brought its own challenges, but also its own rewards. She had learned to trust her instincts, to embrace mistakes as part of the learning process, and to find joy in the music itself rather than the recognition it brought. Through it all, she never forgot the lessons she had learned along the way. The courage to play for the first time in a quiet restaurant, the encouragement of someone who believed in her, and the quiet determination that had kept her going through self-doubt and fear. That foundation gave her strength, reminding her that success wasn't about being perfect but about being real, honest, and true to oneself. By the time she reflected on her journey, she realized how much she had grown. She had transformed from a timid, uncertain waitress into a confident, passionate musician who had found her voice and learned to trust it. The piano was no longer just an instrument, it was a bridge to the world, a way to connect with people, and a symbol of her courage and perseverance. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges and new experiences yet to come, she no longer feared it. She knew that with dedication, passion, and the courage to take each step forward, there was no limit to what she could achieve. The music would guide her as it always had, and she was ready to embrace every note, every melody, and every opportunity that awaited. The months that followed brought a whirlwind of experiences she had never imagined. Life had changed in ways both exciting and challenging. She had started to perform more regularly, traveling to small concerts, local events, and private gatherings where people had come specifically to hear her play. Each time she sat at a piano, her heart raced, but she also felt a sense of calm she hadn't known before. The music had become a part of her, a way to communicate what words could not express. Though the performances were growing in number and complexity, the young woman never lost sight of why she had started. She remembered the quiet evenings at the restaurant, the first time she had touched the keys in front of someone other than herself. That memory grounded her, reminding her that this was never about fame or recognition. It was about sharing a piece of her soul, connecting with people through the music that had always lived inside her. Even with the growing success, The road was far from easy. There were long hours of practice, moments of exhaustion, and nights filled with doubt. Sometimes she would sit at the piano and feel her fingers falter, her mind clouded with worry. What if she wasn't good enough? What if people stopped listening? What if her dream was only temporary? But each time the doubts surfaced, she reminded herself of the first night she had played in the restaurant, the night when fear had turned into something beautiful, and she had seen the impact of her music on others. That thought became a quiet anchor, giving her strength to continue. Her performances began attracting more attention. A small article in a local newspaper described her as a hidden gem in the city's music scene, and soon, invitations came from larger venues. The young woman felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Every new opportunity was a chance to grow, but it also carried the risk of failure. She had learned, however, that growth came from facing fear, not avoiding it. Each performance, no matter how small or large, was a chance to connect, to share, and to push past the walls she had once built around herself. One evening, she was invited to perform at a community festival, a place filled with families, friends, and strangers from all walks of life. The stage was outdoors, surrounded by colorful lights and the sound of laughter and chatter from the crowd. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves as she approached the piano. This time, though, the fear was tempered by confidence. She had faced the audience before, and she had learned that the music was bigger than her doubts. As she began to play, a hush fell over the crowd. People stopped talking, children paused their running games, and even the dogs wandering nearby seemed to listen. The young woman felt the music flow through her, each note carrying emotion, memory, and story. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but for the joy of the moment, for the connection between her and the people around her. The performance lasted longer than she had expected. Time seemed to stretch and bend around the music, and for a while there was nothing in the world except the melody and the faces of people listening. Some swayed gently to the music, others closed their eyes to feel it more deeply. For the young woman, it was a reminder that music had a power far beyond herself. It could move, inspire, and even heal. When the final note lingered and faded, the crowd erupted into applause. The sound was thunderous, not just polite, but full of gratitude and admiration. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. This was the affirmation she had longed for, not the kind that came from a single person's approval, but the kind that came from the shared experience of music connecting hearts. After the festival, a woman approached her. She was older, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "You've got something special," she said. "Your music touches people in ways they don't even realize. Keep going. The world needs to hear you." Her words resonated deeply. The young woman realized that the journey she had embarked on wasn't just about personal fulfillment. It was also about sharing something larger with the world. Every performance, every note was a way to leave a mark, however small, on the lives of others. The months that followed were filled with new challenges. Traveling between venues, practicing for longer periods, and balancing performances with daily life was exhausting. Yet every challenge was met with determination. She learned to manage her time, to care for herself even as she pursued her dream, and to take moments of quiet reflection to stay grounded. The piano had become both a sanctuary and a tool, a way to express herself and a reminder of the journey she had taken. One particularly memorable night, she was invited to play at a charity event benefiting children's education. The audience included teachers, parents, and community leaders. She felt an unusual pressure, knowing that her music was part of an event meant to inspire hope and change. As she played, she let the emotion flow freely. She thought of the children who might hear her music and feel inspired to follow their own dreams. She thought of the quiet girl she had once been, too afraid to share her talent, and how far she had come. By the end of the performance, there were tears in the eyes of many, including herself. She realized that music had become more than a passion. It had become a bridge, a way to touch lives, and a reminder that courage and perseverance could change not just her world, but the world around her. Despite the growing recognition, she remained humble. She continued to play in small venues, to connect personally with people, and to practice tirelessly. Fame or success was never her goal. Authenticity and passion were. Each day, she discovered more about herself through the music, her strengths, her fears, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The young woman's journey was far from over. There were still unknowns, challenges, and moments of doubt, but she had learned to embrace uncertainty, to trust her instincts, and to find strength in her own courage. She had discovered that the most important part of any dream was not the applause or the recognition, but the courage to begin and the perseverance to continue, even when the path was difficult. As she looked ahead, she knew that her music would continue to guide her, opening doors she hadn't yet imagined and connecting her with people she hadn't yet met. Each performance was a new chapter, each note a step forward. The journey was ongoing, and she was ready to embrace every challenge, every opportunity, and every moment of beauty that came with it. Through it all, she had discovered the truth about herself. She was capable, she was resilient, and her voice, both in music and in life, was worth sharing. And in that realization, she found a sense of freedom, joy, and purpose that no one could take away. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a part of her story, and a part of the world she was shaping with every melody.